other day?
Alan, I was out spraying. I got sick in my stomach, dizzy, and I blacked out. They took me to the hospital, and the doctor said I had pesticide poison.
You know, Joe, I've always told you to wear your protective gear. I've never been injured. I always wear mine. Here, let's do it right this time.
Pesticides are designed to poison pests. Unfortunately, pesticides are also poisonous to people. Pesticide applicators, because they are exposed to far greater than normal contact with pesticides, must minimize their exposure by wearing protective clothing and equipment and handling pesticides safely, which means practicing good safety habits. Most pesticide accidents result from careless practices or lack of knowledge about safe handling of pesticides. Pesticide exposure can be prevented by using protective clothing and equipment. A pesticide applicator is most vulnerable to accidental exposure during mixing and loading of pesticides, application of pesticides, and cleanup and disposal. Pesticide risk is a function both of toxicity and exposure. Factors that can affect the amount of pesticide exposure are the pesticide dosage, frequency of application, the type of pesticide formulation and percentage of active ingredient, the conditions under which a pesticide is used. For example, exposure potential is greater during misting or fogging than during ground spraying because the pesticide is atomized. Other factors affecting exposure are where it will be applied and the length of application, and acute toxicity, or LD50. Applicators can be exposed to pesticides in two major ways: acute exposure and chronic exposure. Some pesticides are highly toxic to humans. Only a few drops in the mouth or on the skin can cause severe injury or death. These are considered acute poisonings, sickness or death from one exposure to a pesticide. Most acute poisonings take place when applicators come into direct or occupational contact with pesticides. Such direct contact can cause systemic poisoning. An example would be nervous system illness due to acute exposure to organophosphate or carbamate pesticides. Symptoms and signs of this illness are dizziness, vomiting, pinpoint pupils, and loss of consciousness. Or topical illness, which can vary from severe skin burns and eye damage to mild irritations of the skin and eyes. The Environmental Protection Agency, by law, must determine the acute toxicity of chemicals that are swallowed, inhaled, or absorbed through the skin. The most common measure of acute toxicity involves feeding rats or mice an increasing dose of a pesticide until 1/2 of the target population dies. This level, calculated in milligrams of pesticide per kilogram of body weight and known as the LD50, is then used to fit human populations. EPA labels pesticides into 3 signal word categories according to their acute toxicity. Highly toxic, indicated by the label signal word danger; moderately toxic, indicated by the label signal word warning; and slightly toxic, indicated by the label signal word caution. The acute toxicity represented by the signal word may be from oral, dermal, or inhalation exposure. Almost every label contains a signal word indicating how dangerous the product is to humans. The label also contains additional statements to help you decide the proper precautions to take to protect yourself and other persons who may be exposed. The label is the law, and its directions must be followed. Manufacturers of pesticides must also furnish material safety data sheets which provide additional protective equipment information. And new OSHA regulations, that is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, require supervisors to inform pesticide applicators using hazardous substances of the kinds of protective equipment available. Pesticides can enter the body in three major ways: through the mouth, orally, through the skin and eyes, dermally, and through the lungs, by inhalation.
Exposure plus toxicity equals the degree of hazard. By limiting your exposure, there is less hazard. One way of doing this is to wear protective clothing and equipment. The first thing we want to talk about are the eyes. Pesticides can enter the body fastest by this route because of the greater surface area under the eyelids and the high density of nerve tissue. This type of exposure commonly occurs by splashing pesticides on unprotected eyes, particularly during mixing and loading, and while spraying overhead or downwind from the nozzle. So we want to protect ourselves with some type of eye covering. A face shield is a good start. Or you may find goggles to be more handy. I like these goggles because they have vents and they don't fog as much. Make sure you use these tabs to tighten the goggles so you get good protection. The key here is protection from splash. One other thing. In case of a pesticide accident in the field, I carry this portable eye wash station. I fill it with a gallon of water, and it squirts for about 15 minutes. The most common route of exposure for pesticides is through the skin. One reason is because there is so much exposable surface area. Anytime you are working with pesticides, you should at least wear long-legged trousers, long-sleeve shirt, or a coverall type garment. When working with liquid concentrates, I prefer to wear this Tyvek suit, which is impervious to liquids. It fits tight around the ankles, but allows air to circulate throughout the suit. It's not nearly as hot as a total rubber suit, and therefore I can work in hot environments and remain comfortable. It is inexpensive and disposable. Speaking of liquids, a particularly vulnerable dermal spot is the groin area. There is 100% absorption there for men and women. I want to protect myself by wearing a rubber apron. It is absolutely necessary when mixing, measuring, or loading a pesticide. Pouring concentrates from one container to another is the most hazardous activity. So when handling concentrated or highly toxic pesticides, wear an apron and gloves. The pesticide label should tell you what type of protective gloves to wear when handling a chemical. For liquid formulations, liquid-proof neoprene gloves are best. They should be long enough to protect my wrist and unlined. Linings can absorb chemicals and are hard to clean. For most jobs, sleeves should be outside of the gloves to keep pesticides from running down the sleeves and into the gloves. However, if I'm working with my hands and arms overhead, I put my sleeves inside the gloves. Sturdy shoes and socks are sufficient for some pesticide applications, but neoprene or rubber boots are a wise precaution because canvas, cloth, and leather shoes can readily absorb pesticides. Never wear sneakers or leather shoes when handling liquid concentrates or pesticides with danger signal word on the label. Neoprene or rubber unlined boots are necessary. Wear them with the trouser legs outside so the pesticides will not run down the leg and collect in the boot. The top of the head is vulnerable because it's so vascular. Wear some sort of head protection, particularly when spraying pesticides overhead or working in drift or spray. I have a good bump cap here. Notice there is a lip on the back which will keep the pesticides off the back of your neck. Finally, if I will be in prolonged contact with a pesticide or wet by an overhead spray application, or using a highly toxic pesticide, I'll want to be wearing this rubberized rain suit. It has an attached protective hood and provides good overall body protection. What have I left unprotected? Oh yes, my lungs. The most hazardous route of pesticide exposure is through the lungs. The respiratory tract is much more absorbent than the skin. If I'm using a dust, I wear this dust mask to keep the dust out of my mouth and lungs. You must wear an approved respirator when the label directs you to do so. Use only those respirators that carry the seal of approval from NIOSH, which is the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. Read the manufacturer's instructions on the use and care of any respirator and its parts before you use it.
Even if the label does not require it, it is a good safety measure to wear a respirator if the pesticide you are mixing or applying has a label precautionary statement such as "do not breathe vapors or spray mist," or "harmful or fatal if inhaled," and if you will be exposed to a pesticide for a long time, if you are working in an enclosed area, or if you just want added protection from particulate matter, fumes, or spray droplets.
I wear a cartridge respirator if I will be intermittently exposed to a pesticide. These half-face masks cover the mouth and nose. To cover the eyes also, use one that is combined with goggles, or wear separate goggles. I wear this canister respirator and mask when I will be continuously exposed to gaseous materials over a long period of time. It has longer lasting absorbent material and filters than the cartridge respirators and provides full face protection.
The cartridge and canister respirators rely on the wearer's ability to draw air through the filters in normal breathing. To be effective, they must be tightly sealed to the face. They must fit well. Long sideburns, a beard, or glasses may prevent an adequate seal.
When applying pesticides, change cartridges after 8 hours of use, or sooner if you smell a breakthrough, that is, smell what you're spraying. Remove and safely dispose of filters, cartridges, and canisters after use. For many pesticide use situations, this is the type of full protection you will need.
A pesticide applicator must be meticulous about personal cleanup and care of clothing and equipment. Wear clean clothes daily. If clothes get wet with pesticides, remove them immediately and change to clean clothes. Wash hats, gloves, and boots daily, inside and out. If you spill a pesticide on yourself, wash immediately. When you finish working with pesticides or pesticide-contaminated equipment, rinse them before removing them. Take a shower. Wash your body and hair thoroughly with detergent and water. Using protective clothing and equipment will reduce pesticide exposure and prevent pesticide accidents. So will following good safety habits. Pesticides should be transported only in correctly labeled containers. The safest way to haul pesticides is in the back of a truck. Secure all containers to prevent breakage and spillage. In case of pesticide accident, you should know some basic first aid. Remove the victim from further exposure. Remove contaminated clothing and drench the skin with water. If there is pesticide in the eye, wash the eye quickly with a gentle stream of clean water for 15 minutes or more. Read the first aid instructions on the label if possible. Take the pesticide container or the label with you when you take the victim to a physician. Do not carry the pesticide in the passenger space of a vehicle. Now that you understand how to prevent accidental pesticide exposure, We hope you will be more alert to these hazardous situations. Come a long way from these days and attitudes.
Saboteurs don't rob us of the food and manpower so urgently needed to win the war. A little work, a little oil, a little of this poison or that. You can all fight on this front. Smash the insect axis.
We should also have a much more enlightened understanding of the hazards involved in pesticide handling and use.